Well, so glad to have you watching or listening to Curiosity Not Judgment. Welcome. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So, as I was thinking today about the topic that we needed to discuss, I had one little phrase that was just going through my mind, and I asked Gary, he said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" He said, "Oh, it's got a lot of curious applications." And so the phrase is simply measure twice, cut once. And I know I've heard it before, especially as it pertains to carpentry, but you think it's got a much broader application.
Well, it's a philosophy. It's everything from safety to waste and scrap in manufacturing. As a woodworker myself, and I don't do as much as I'd like to anymore, but I used to do quite a bit of woodworking, everything from chairs to beds to furniture when I was young, poor, enlisted Air Force. And it made a big difference, and especially if you're working with some real solid oak, which is expensive, you don't want to cut a piece short because you can't add to wood. And it does come from carpentry, and I remember saving myself many times by doing it. So, the principle is you take a tape measure or a yardstick or whatever you're measuring with, and you measure, and then you make a mark, and then you retract it or put it away or do it again, and then you take it out and you do it again. I would even reverse the wood and measure it from the other side just to make sure. And I absolutely caught myself a few times. I would suggest that it's on the order of potentially 10, 20%. You're assuming that many things are going right in a measurement. You've got your tape at the end of where you want to start. You're looking at the right line when you want to do it. You've calculated it right, and it's 23 3/8, and you've counted 1, 2, 3 on the eighths, and you've done your mark, and it hasn't gone right or left, and etc. And it hasn't moved. So then putting it away and taking it out and doing it again, it saves me multiple times.
So then how would you apply that same technique, obviously not with a yardstick or a measuring tape, to business applications?
If you have made any kind of calculation, if you've made any measurement, if you've made any kind of assumption, the curious thing to do would be to say, did that all go right? We often think of things as, like, you think of a single measurement. We don't realize that there was 4 or 5 things that went into that single measurement. And you're assuming that all 4 or 5 of those things worked out perfectly to get that single measurement. And you can apply that to any part of life. You could apply that to, putting laundry soap in your washing machine the first time. I'll never forget when we went to a new washing machine, and it was these low soap washing machines. And I know I put in 3 times the soap I needed, right? And so, but I figured out later that there's a little mark that tells you when you convert from powder to liquid on a low soap machine where you're supposed to do it. Right? So I made a couple of bad assumptions in that one at first. I think that assuming you're doing something right the first time you've done it is the key.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm in if I'm visiting a new city for the first time, I always love to go with somebody who lives in that city.
Sure.
Because they know it all, right? And they know if you're making an assumption about this or this or this. Boy, imagine coming to Albuquerque for the first time and going up and trying to find white oak in not North Albuquerque Acres, but Sandia Heights. Okay. There are 70 white oaks. There's White Oak Court, White Oak Street, White Oak. My point is, if you don't know the lay of the land and you're in unfamiliar territory, doing something the first time, we've been doing a bunch of COVID tests because we, not necessarily worried about ourselves, but whenever we have a little cough or something, we travel frequently and we worry about everybody else. We don't want to expose anybody. So we just switched from one type of COVID test to another. Well, the first time you read through those directions, and even if you watch the little video, I love it when they send a little video, like, here's what you're supposed to do. The people who wrote the directions are coming from a place of being very familiar. They've probably done it 700 times. So they're writing those directions from that standpoint to somebody who's never done it before, potentially. And after I watch the video, I go, oh, that's different than I would have done it.
Right. Yeah, how you interpret the written instruction versus how you see it demonstrated on video.
So, I mean, look, and Einstein said, doing something over and over again, you will always improve your performance. Not that your ability has gotten better, but your ability to do has increased because it's not the first time you've done it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking about the idea of doing it again, whatever that might be. And one of the things I've done again in this calendar year is I've retaken some tests that were like indicators of personality type or leadership style or whatever.
Like a Myers-Briggs or something.
Yeah, those
like
kinds of tests. So I think I've done retaken two different tests that I had taken, say, 2016, 2017, and retaken them now these years later. Well, not only have I had a number of career changes in those years, but I think I've matured and developed in the things that I do and how I interact with people. And I was really surprised to see a pretty stark difference in the two tests. And so doing it again might really benefit your own understanding of how you've matured over time and how your adaptation of life's circumstances and changes that you've encountered have driven a different outcome in those types of personality or leadership profiling tests. And so I found that to be a really curious thing to sit on. And if I would just go with the initial judgment of, okay, well, that test is right and it's never going to change, maybe I miss out on a deeper understanding of how to more effectively communicate, how to more effectively engage, and to have taken the time to be curious about, have I changed, I think was really important.
Have you changed? Was there measurement error in the first time you took it? Has your ability to take the test changed? Has your thinking about how to respond to those questions changed?
Yeah.
I would tell you that when I first took the Myers-Briggs, I was an ESTJ when I was a young up-and-coming engineer at Intel. But I will also tell you that ESTJ was the right answer when I first took that test. I now test as an ENFP. Have I changed? Has the test changed? The test hasn't changed.
Right.
Has my ability to answer the questions or my responses to the questions changed? Has my environment changed? Has my personality changed, if it's a personality test, or other attributes about me changed? So the measurement error comes from, if you took the test today and you took it tomorrow and you took it the next day and the next day, and you took the average of all those four, you probably have a more accurate answer than if you just took it once. Taking it now and taking it 5 years from now, or comparing today's answers from 5 years ago, I think there's some other variables in there that might be taken into account.
Oh, absolutely. But it does change your understanding. It changes maybe even your outlook potentially. So the reason why I elected to take it again is I had somebody tell me, it's like, oh, well, you're a this voice, in the 5 voices, pioneer, nurturer, those 5 categories. So I had somebody say, well, you're this. And I thought about it. I was like, I don't think I am that voice. And so I went back and I took the test again. And not only was I not that voice, but I was something that really surprised me. And so I scored as a guardian nurturer. And it surprised me that guardian was my top. And we joked about when we first did, I think I did it with you the first time years ago in a small group setting.
Yes.
We joked about nobody likes the guardians. I was like, great, now I'm one of those people that nobody likes. I took an issue with it for just a moment until I really read, like, what does a guardian do, and the importance of a guardian. And that coupled with a nurturer, I thought, no, that actually does make sense about my personality and how I view the world and how important it is to follow through with commitments and to make things right. And so it was kind of laughable, but it was a learning lesson for me that I have changed, circumstances in my life have changed, the test hasn't changed, but there was validity in measuring twice.
So much in there. First of all, you are a guardian. And yes, I don't like guardians.
Okay.
But no, guardians, have absolutely a critical role in any group. If you don't have a guardian in the group, you're in run, right? I mean, you're going to go off and do things that are not good. And they don't have to have those severe consequences, but guardians are essential, and actually all the voices are essential, and the fact that they're heard in any given situation is essential. And if you haven't heard of the 5 voices, go to giant.tv and take the test. It's actually very instructful. I think the purpose of those tests is to be more directional than prescriptive. In other words, you tend to do certain things, and I am, absolutely a creative connector, right? There's no question. But I think when I first took it, I think I maybe have swapped those 2 or something. So there's nuances in those things. But you point to something very important. There's bias when you take those tests.
Certainly.
And it's your own bias. Sometimes we don't answer the questions of how we are.
But
We answer them how you want to be.
Yeah.
And if I feel like I want to be more of a visionary, more of a creative, well, then I may not answer and come out a guardian, right? Boy, I would slay. It would be terrible. I'd go hide in a corner if I came out a guardian.
Thanks,
No,
Gary.
I'm kidding. Like I said, guardians are so important to the process, but it's also important to have other voices, right? And so knowing which one you are is part of that self-awareness thing, that journey that we're always on, which is a prime example of curiosity, not judgment.
Absolutely.
We judge ourselves. We're our own worst judge, clearly. Well, let me speak for myself. I am my own worst judge. And some of those judgments are flat wrong. And I judge myself based on a myriad of inputs from other people and from situations and from my interpretation of same. Right. And so I am wrong to some degree, by definition. And I think constantly being curious about that, boy, I responded differently in that situation than I would have expected. What's that about?
Yep.
I think is a prime example of this. The purpose of any of those tests is not to put you in a cubbyhole and keep you there. The purpose of those tests is to help you communicate with others better and to be part of a team better and to be self-aware so that you know your own tendencies better. Because a lot of us never do take the time to become that self-aware. I know I have made great strides, and I'm still only this big as far as self-awareness in my life, and I think it's to my own detriment.
I'm thinking about the initial phrase, measure twice, cut once, and how it impacts the relationships that we have and the people that we engage with. And so if we're looking at the measure twice as the exercise of analyzing and understanding ourselves, being curious about our responses and our temperament and our feedback and all those things, the cut really can be detrimental to somebody else. If you're thinking about, I don't take this too literally, but this is kind of how my mind works. If we're going to have to say something difficult to somebody, if we're going to have to make a cut to somebody, I think we had better make sure that we're measuring twice on our own side, because our motivation has to be right, our demeanor has to be right. There's a lot of things that need to be checked and rechecked before we have those difficult conversations.
You're not going to get another chance to have that conversation.
Right.
And that's exactly right. And Covey used to say you can be efficient with things and do it over and over again until you get it right, even though there's scrap and redo in a manufacturing or a production sense. But with people, you have to be effective. And effectiveness means thinking very clearly about what you're trying to say and what your motivation is ahead of time. And we don't do that enough. And I think that measure twice, cut once really has a lot to do with interactions with other people. Because, how often have you been in the middle of firing off some email that's pretty
Pointed.
laced with anger or whatever,
Yeah.
And then thought better about it and thought, I could probably soften this a little bit. I could probably try to put myself in their shoes for a second and try to think of what were they really trying to say. And those kinds of things. And I think that's critical. And that's a form of measuring twice, cut once.
Certainly.
Because once you do the thing, sometimes you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Mm-hmm. Well, it reminds me now of a whole lot of broader applications, and I think you said that at the very beginning, but now that I'm sitting and really contemplating it, if you've got to downsize your workforce, boy, that is got to be a literal thing that has to happen. You got to measure twice. Is that really going to be a cost savings to eliminate that role? Is that really going to benefit the company? Is it really going to fill in the blank before you make the determination to cut somebody's position from the organization? And so that's got to be some, not just math, but some soul searching, so to speak, and some other techniques to really figure out, is that cut going to benefit in the way that your cursory math led you to believe it would?
There's no question in this situation, and unfortunately I've been through these a number of times in my career, and it is it's terrible. I mean, you're trying to put in emotional factors and people's actual lives and everything into the mix. But from a pure cost savings standpoint, if you're really trying to if your motivation is to try to save the company, there's tough decisions to be made about what the return on that cut is going to be, and is this actually going to, and one of the famous sayings was always, you can never cut yourself to growth. People say, well, we need to grow the company, maybe we can cut some expenses to grow the company. I'd rather figure out how to utilize the resources I have more effectively and more productively than to try to cut my way to growth, because it's disruptive, and it is, and it's tough on the organization, and people have to reassess and mentally have to get back in the game. If you think about your own self, if you're concentrating and trying to do something and then you get distracted or interrupted, how hard is it to come back to that? And so I was just talking about resiliency today in a meeting, and I was very fascinated by somebody pointed out the fact in measurements after 9/11, after Storm Sandy, after Katrina, the loss in, people think about the loss in the assets. The loss in business and system interruption was 4 to 10 times the loss of the asset.
Interesting.
So we don't, sometimes we measure in our own heads the wrong thing.
Yeah. Well, just coming back to a real simplistic example, I think about family budgeting. So you might list out your regular expenditures each month, and if you look at the smallest spending, that might be your monthly bill to Netflix or to any other streaming service, and it can go up incrementally from there. And maybe you think it's easiest to cut some of those little expenses to make a big difference. And I'm not advocating to keep services that you're not using or underusing. I'm not advocating for that at all. But I'll give an example. If you've got, 2 or 3 streaming services and they're all $8, $10, $12 a month, and you just arbitrarily cut a couple of them, and then you realize, oh, well, that one streaming service is actually the singular time a week when we get together as a family and have this show that we watch together. There's always a lot of laughs and conversation around it. Just because it was $8.99 a month and it was an easy thing to cut, maybe wasn't the most beneficial for your overall budget. But conversely, you've got some bigger bills that might seem harder to cut out, but really are you utilizing them to the full extent of the value that you're paying for them? And I think the measure twice, cut once principle can definitely apply to budgeting, family budgeting, and maybe you have multiple people measure, so to speak. And I think you're going to be surprised to find that different people ascribe different values to certain activities or expenses that you have in your budget, and to really be curious about why people cling to certain things and why people are quick to want to let other things go, and then have the conversation where you kind of have a meet in the middle posture about it.
Yeah, and that takes, instead of looking at a singular item, it takes a systems approach.
Right.
And that's exactly the right way to think of it, because if you say, okay, if we're going to try to do some belt tightening around here, what do we want to do as a family together for R&R, our recreation activities. And if the number one most expensive streaming service is the one thing everybody picks versus going out to eat or going out bowling or going out something else that's much more expensive, it's much better to keep that service and do that intentionally as a family, especially because you've now got everybody's buy-in, than all the other streaming services,
Certainly.
right? Even if it's the most expensive.
Yeah, so again, that measure twice, cut once approach, lots of different applications, whether we're talking about relationships and hard conversations that we need to have, or budgeting, or workforce, or carpentry. It is, I think, a general principle that we can adapt in the curiosity, not judgment space, because it really says a lot about the importance of slowing down, contemplating, questioning yourself, your judgment, and your assertion that you're right. You know, questioning, is my judgment correct, before you take action.
And, you know, and I'm not the best planner in the world, but a lot of people will say that, you know, if you plan and do, it seems like it takes more time, but doesn't it take more time to redo it? Excuse me, if you haven't done it right the first time. And so that upfront planning would serve us all, and especially when it comes to things like safety, and working with energized systems, and thinking about things, especially if you're unfamiliar with them. The first time you do something, you need to be a little bit more aware of what's happening before you do them. And so that measure twice, cut once has a lot of applications in other ways, because you're making certain assumptions in that measurement, and doing it again. It may take a couple of extra seconds, but it's going to save you the consequence of having to redo or scrap something.
Yeah. Well, we will put it back to you with the question, are there other phrases that maybe you've heard that have been used in other fields that you could see applying to the curiosity, not judgment quest, much like measure twice, cut once? Let us know if something crosses your mind. I'd be curious to explore that with you. As always, you can find us at the main website, curiositynotjudgment.com. We've got a Facebook page, and most of the streaming services have, not streaming service, most of the places where you can hear or watch this have opportunities for you to comment. And so you're welcome to leave a comment, and we can certainly look through those and see what some of your tips might be on that very subject matter. So I guess we'll wish everyone a good week and see you next time.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in.